Perfect. So my name is Kelly Christensen. I'm one of the academic coaches here on campus, and I am very excited to speak with you all tonight. It's always lovely when we get invited to sorority houses. I love working with the Greek system, so it's always a joy. So what we're going to talk about today is, and if you want to mute yourself, that'd be super helpful. Great. So what we're going to talk about today is sort of adjusting to an online environment and how this incorporates scheduling, studying, and campus resources. So we're going to go over some tips for time management, some good active studying tips, and then a brief overview of some different campus resources that are available to you. And I'll give you information on how to access those resources after Thanksgiving break when we go completely online. So with that, let's get started. And the first thing that I want you all to think about is, how do we stay motivated, especially right now when things are really difficult? I know every student I've talked with has talked about, like, man, I just can't get motivated to actually do the work that I need to get done. So how do we make our studying, our time management, and campus resources work for us? So in this presentation, we're going to go through identifying the priorities that we have on our schedule, actually making our schedule visible, creating an action plan for studying, as well as some studying tips, how to use our resources, and then a reminder to breathe. So with that, let's dive right into time management. And the first aspect of really good time management is figuring out what actually goes into our schedule. So we want to identify the priorities that we have. And some of those things include classes, study time, meals, work, sleep, and breaks. So oftentimes when I work with students, they identify really easily classes, study times, and work as important things, but we tend to forget stuff like meals, sleep, and breaks. And those are just as important to include in our schedule, especially right now when that feeling of burnout can be really strong for everybody. So what we're going to do is kind of go through how we build that schedule overall. I'll give you a couple of examples, and we'll talk about how that changes in an online environment as well. So when you're building your schedule, you want to start with things that have set times that you can't change. So classes and work are prime examples. Then you want to add in some study times. And this is something I'll say a lot, but make sure to keep those between an hour and an hour and a half, simply because our ability to really focus and keep track of information starts to decline after about an hour. So making sure you're incorporating some breaks between those study times can be really helpful in the long run. And then again, I'll sound like a broken record, but don't forget meals, breaks, and other activities that actually help you stay sane through all of this. That's really critical right now. So going through an example schedule, this is just for a week. The first thing I'm going to do is plug in my class times, right? So I've got Comm, English, Soc, Anthropology, and Spanish. Those things don't change. They're going to go in first to give me some structure. Next, I'm going to add in my work schedule. Maybe it's really consistent from week to week. Maybe it changes. But again, it's something that I don't have control over, so I want to make sure it goes in next. Then I'm going to start to sprinkle in some homework and study time. Now you'll notice that there's a lot of it that I put into this schedule. Maybe it isn't something that you need as much of, but making sure you designate some time that you want to study. And you might have study table obligations, so putting those in there as a reminder for yourself is also something really great to do. And you'll notice that these blocks of study time are no longer than an hour, and that I have some gaps in between them throughout the day. Now I'm adding in some time to sleep. And this may sound weird. You're like, Kelly, oh my God, I'm not a child. I don't need to give myself a bedtime. But actually you should. It's really critical to maintain a healthy sleep schedule while you're in college, because the fact of the matter is, if you mess up your sleep schedule now, it's going to take a lot of work later on in life to get it back to a normal place. So trying your best to keep a consistent sleep schedule can really help you in the long run. And I realize that you aren't always going to be able to go to bed at a consistent time, Every once in a while, you're gonna have to pull an all-nighter. I get it, it's college, I had to do the same thing. But trying your hardest to have some sort of consistency is a good thing to aim for. Now, include times to eat. So I'm not gonna tell you how to eat, when to eat, what to eat, or anything like that, but make sure that you're eating. You need that energy to keep going through all of the different obligations that you have. And scheduling some meal times is a really nice way to remind yourself to step away from work and take a break so that you don't feel burnt out by the end of the day. And finally, add in breaks. Again, broken record Kelly is going to tell you over and over and over again to do this, but it is really beneficial. And if you're like me, who was a bit of an overachiever, it might be really hard for you to take breaks and not feel guilty about them. And one way to really minimize that guilt is to make sure that they're scheduled into your whole weekly schedule ahead of time. And what this does is when you get to a time when you have a break scheduled, you're able to say like, oh, okay, I put this in, I have time to finish studying later, or I have time to finish my homework later. I can take this half-hour break and feel okay about it. And with these breaks, be specific, include what you're going to do. Maybe it's having a friend night, maybe it's something to do with the chapter, maybe it's going to the rec center. Just making sure that you have that reminder for yourself can be really nice. Now, if we look at the schedule, it is full every minute of the day. I personally hate that. I am not a type of person who wants to schedule out every single hour. It's really overwhelming for me, and it doesn't actually help me in the long run. So here's another option that a student made with me for a different type of schedule, right? So if planning every hour of your day is really overwhelming, just stick to as much detail as you need. So in this schedule, I have my classes, my work, some times to eat, and some times to study. You'll notice that there's not as many big blocks of study time, and that's because I realized maybe I didn't need that many. So just plugging in what exactly it is that you feel like you'll need and being consistent with those. And the reason that I encourage folks to include some study time in their schedule is it's a nice reminder and a nice place to land when you're feeling really stressed out about classes, because you can look to your schedule and say, it's all right. I've got 2 hours planned out later this evening to actually get some of this done. I can stress about it then. Now, schedule building, So schedule building online is a little bit of a challenge because there's a lot more flexibility. And Addison, great question. I can send you a template for that schedule right after this meeting. We have them through coaching, so I'll just include it with my email of this whole video so you can have that. So when it comes to schedule building online, we have a lot of flexibility, right? So online classes can be done at different times of the day to make your life a little bit easier. But with that scheduling freedom comes a huge lack of structure. So it's really important to find ways to build that structure for yourself. And building that structure can really help with motivation. So after fall break, you might be feeling really overwhelmed, a lack of motivation, just kind of stressed out about not having that consistency of being in class. So getting a schedule in place beforehand can mitigate some of that stress now. It's really important with online schedules to be specific. So saying exactly what you plan on doing during the time that you block out in your schedule. So I have an example of sort of an online schedule. So just like before, you're going to go through and plug in things that you can't change. So let's say your classes are sticking to a synchronous lecture schedule, meaning you must be at a lecture at a certain time. Plug those things in first as a reminder for yourself. Even if you think you'll remember them, plug them in anyway. Next, start putting some time in your schedule to handle coursework that doesn't have a scheduled meeting time. So you still want to make sure that those classes are having a dedicated space in your schedule. So I'm listing out things like watch my recorded lectures and take notes on posted slides. And I'm going to do that at a consistent time every week to make sure that I stay on top of it. Right now, I teach an online class, and I've noticed that a lot of students will very last minute submit everything at like 11:50 p.m. on Friday when it's due at 11:59 p.m. And they're able to do it and the work is fine, but I'm sure that they're under a lot of stress. So scheduling some blocks of time to handle your coursework earlier in the week can really help mitigate some of that stress. So just like before, I'm going to schedule in a lot of homework and study time for myself, keeping in mind that I want to stick to an hour to an hour and a half for my study time. And you'll notice something in this schedule. I left a lot of open space. So you may have a job that takes up some of this, or you may have some other obligations that go into your schedule. But when you're working online, it's even more important to incorporate some flexibility. So it's all about finding sort of that balance between structure for ourselves, but also flexibility because we don't know what's going to happen from day to day. Things might pop up that are really unexpected, and you want to make sure that you can shuffle things around in order to still meet all of these changing priorities. So a couple other tips for online scheduling. This is a really big one, is schedule time to check your email. So I'm sure all of you have noticed that the amount of emails you get is a lot higher this semester just because so many things are online. And it's important to stay on top of those announcements from both your instructors, your university, the advisors, everything like that. So my general rule of thumb is check your email at least 3 times a day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, and once around 5 or 6 o'clock, just to make sure you've gotten all the important announcements, you haven't missed any meetings or other important things like that. Now, another tip that I tell a lot of students is make a master list of due dates and deadlines. I tend to do this on Sunday evenings, and what that does for me is it gives me a much clearer picture of what's coming up this week. So I can start to identify like, okay, Tuesday is going to be a really hectic day for me. I'm going to try and get a lot done on Monday so that it's not as stressful as it could be. So making this list might be a little overwhelming because you might have like 30 different things that need to happen, but you can then take that list and break it up into separate daily to-do lists for yourself. Utilize your phone and computer for reminders. So if you don't already use your Outlook calendar, it's a really nice way to stay on top of everything. BB Learn has a calendar built in where you can see what's due and when for all of your different classes. And then just set reminders on your phone, set an alarm to make sure that you're getting an assignment in. And then set those reminders for both the day something is due and 1 to 2 days beforehand. That way you give yourself a little bit of flexibility in all of the work that you need to get done. So I already kind of mentioned this, but try breaking down your weekly to-do list into smaller daily to-do lists. And this can really help if you're feeling overwhelmed by things that you need to get done. So maybe all of your classes decide to have a test next week, kind of seeing where those tests fall and how much time you actually have can be a nice way to mitigate stress. So we figured out what we're going to put into our schedule, how we're going to put it in. Now we need to make sure that we can actually see it. And the most important thing when it comes to time management is you want to find the method that works best for you. So it doesn't matter what I say is my favorite thing. When you get down to it at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're using something that you'll actually stick to. So one of the things is you want to make it visible. Either it's, on your phone and giving you reminders, or if you're sticking with a paper schedule, put it somewhere where you're going to see it, whether that's tacked up next to the wall or next to your computer, or if you have like a nice planner, making sure it's always with you so that you're able to check it throughout the day. And here's the big thing. Actually recording what you need to do can really help motivate you to get it done. So we're very good at holding ourselves accountable for things when we record them and make them visible. If you're like me, when I was an undergraduate, I kept most things just in my brain as like a running tally, which I could do, and I didn't miss too many things. But I also found that it was really easy for me to procrastinate and put things off until the last possible moment. And it wasn't until my senior year that I finally figured things out and realized, oh, Kelly, if you just write it down, you're more likely to start doing it sooner. So I highly recommend checking that out, trying that out for yourselves. And you can use your paper planner, your phone, different apps. Wunderlist is a really nice organizational app. So I highly recommend that folks check that out as well. So we've got our schedule, we've got everything set up, we're feeling pretty organized, we're feeling pretty good. Now we actually need to get down to it and study. So, we've kind of looked at our schedule and we've determined where we have some time to study. But the other really important thing to do is identify when you do your best studying. So if you're someone who doesn't like to block out every hour of your schedule, something you can try is sort of reverse scheduling. I call it the reverse contouring of scheduling, which is silly and it's just something that helps me remember it. But the way it works is you identify the time of day that you're most productive and you make sure to leave that open in your schedule so that if you feel really productive and great, you can get a lot of your studying and homework done. So for me, that time of day is from like 9 to 11 a.m. So for work, I try and leave it open so I can get a lot of data work done. Maybe it's later in the evening for you or mid-afternoon, just kind of figuring out where it is that you get your best work done. And then keep in mind, like I've said before, 1 to 1.5 hours at a time. If you're studying in a group, it's actually a little bit easier and more sustainable to go longer, but still incorporating some breaks so that none of you get frustrated or burnt out from all of that studying. And then the other thing you want to think about are where are some good places to study. So while we're taking online classes, it's important to find a space for yourself to really dedicate to studying. And the one thing I recommend is try to make sure that that space is not also your bed. So if you're going back home after break, make sure that you have some place where you can sit that's not necessarily in bed. And if you don't have a place like that, try and sit at the end of your bed opposite of where your pillow is, just to create some physical separation between where you sleep and where you work. And then what's really important when you're studying is you want to make sure that you minimize some distractions so that you can actually focus on what it is that you need to get done. So we've figured out where we're going to study and when. Now we need to actually get down to it. So we're going to talk a little bit about academic coaches' favorite thing, which is an action plan. And it's a way to give yourself some direction. So an action plan is a way of taking a large task and breaking it up into smaller, more manageable pieces. So you can action plan big projects, homework assignments, study sessions, really anything. I've action planned a vacation as well as my relationship occasionally. So honestly, action planning is really great. When you're making your action plan, it's important to include some intermediate deadlines. And these deadlines really help you prevent procrastination. So we're going to go through a couple different types of action plans so you can see some examples and get some ideas. So first off is, let's say you're action planning a study plan. You're in Bio 114, you've got a test coming up, and you need to figure out how you're going to study chapter 6 of that test. So you give yourself a deadline. Keep in mind these dates are a little wonky. I use this same action plan for the class that I teach. So let's say your deadline was at the end of December or at the end of November to finish chapter 6. What you're going to do is break up by skimming the chapter of the textbook, reminding yourself to attend the Zoom lectures and take notes. You're going to write down all the important terms and concepts onto one page so you have them in an easy to locate place. You're going to try out some practice problems, and then you're going to write some sentence summaries for each of your sections of notes. So a couple things to keep in mind with this action plan. It's really clear about what I'm going to do each day, and I've given myself some wiggle room on the due date. So the actual due date I set for myself was April 26th, but if you look at the plan, it finishes on the 24th. And the reason that I did that is, let's say in the middle of all of this studying, something happens, like my car breaks down and I end up having to stay in like a car mechanic shop for 3 hours, right? that day might be shot, so I might have to adjust my overall plan in order to still get everything done. So building some flexibility in the beginning can help mitigate stress at the end. So now let's talk about action planning a paper. Let's say you have an English 101 paper due at like the week we get back from fall break. So what you're going to do is, just like before, break it up into smaller chunks. And what you'll notice with this action plan is that I actually broke it up into really small steps. So that first day that I'm working on that paper, the only thing I'm doing is finding 3 sources. That's it. As soon as I find those 3 sources, I can be done. Then I'm going to develop a thesis statement by the next time. I'm going to write an extended outline. I'm going to have 1,000 words, then 2,500, then 4,000. Then I'm going to go to the writing center. I'm going to edit it, and I'm going to submit it. So there's a couple things to keep in mind here. When you have really small steps, it's a lot easier to get the motivation to get started. So if you're like me, if you had a giant paper to do, you'd block out 3 hours for yourself, sit down, and stare at your monitor for like an hour and a half before any inspiration struck. And that's really hard. And that's just because our brains can't figure out where it is that we need to get started on this really big task. So giving yourself some small steps to kind of get some traction and keep going is a really nice way to dive into it. And then the other important thing on this action plan is that I included my resources. So I put that I was going to go to the writing center to get some extra help. And utilizing those resources can also give you some accountability. So maybe you plug in a regular time to attend tutoring or an SiPass session. Those little things are going to really help you stay on top of the project that you're trying to complete. So the final thing we're going to talk about is action planning your day. And you can just think of this as a really structured to-do list. So I give myself a time to check my email and respond. I, list out when I'm going to my lectures. After those lectures, I'm going to set some time aside to summarize my notes so that I have a good idea of everything going on there. I'm going to take a break, just like I said. And then I'm going to take some notes on slides and recorded lectures for my Flen class. And I didn't set a deadline for that because I'm not sure how long it's going to take. But afterwards, I'm going to make sure to take a break, and then I'm going to jump on to some homework. Looks like we might have a quick question. Can you make one on an Excel or Google sheet? Yeah, so the schedule template that I will send out to you all is an Excel spreadsheet. And then I'll also send an example of an action plan so you can kind of see where you can fill in those things as well. Okay, so the last sort of time management / study technique that I'm going to talk about is something called the Pomodoro Technique, which some of you may have heard of before, but it's a way to organize the actual time that you're studying. And the way that it works is you just take a big chunk of time and make it into smaller pieces. So for every 25 minutes of intense focus and work, you give yourself a 5-minute break. And after going back and forth like that 4 times, you take a longer half-hour break. And this again really helps with our motivation and kind of preventing procrastination. So let's say you scheduled 2 hours for yourself to study and you sit down and it just feels daunting and it's really hard to stay focused. And that's because our brains don't want to focus for 2 hours straight, but they can focus for 25 minutes. So breaking it down and kind of adjusting your expectations can really help in the long run. And then those 5-minute breaks are going to really prevent burnout. So this is really helpful if you're trying to study for a class that you don't really enjoy, because let's say I had to sit down and study Calc 2 for 3 hours. That sounds terrible. What I'd rather do is study Calc 2 for 25 minutes at a time and take a quick Instagram break between. That feels better for me. And I can say that Calc 2 is terrible because I'm a math major and I earned that privilege. It was rough. Anyway, break down whatever it is that you have to do into smaller chunks to make it a lot more doable. So we've got our time, we've got our plan, we're feeling set up to actually study. Now, how are we going to study? And the one thing that I want you all to take away from this is that effective studying needs to be active. So you can kind of, sorry, my slides went out of order there. What you can do is look at this kind of graphical representation of what effective studying looks like. So we have kind of this aspect of passive learning, and that's reading, listening, sitting in your lectures, that sort of stuff. And it's useful, and it does help you gain a lot of information, but it doesn't build the same connections with the material that you'd get from more active learning. And active learning is more like speaking, saying, and doing the work that you're trying to learn. So we'll go over a couple of examples of how to do this. So one of my absolute favorite study techniques that you can try to check your understanding is by giving an elevator pitch. So an elevator pitch is a 1 to 2 minute speech on a topic that you're currently studying. And the challenge of an elevator pitch is to word it in a way that is understandable by anybody. And this can serve as a way to really check your understanding of the material, make sure you know what's going on, and that ability to summarize the material in a clear and concise way can really help you get a sense of how well you understand things. So you're very lucky right now, for those of you that are living in-house, you have a lot of people that you could bother with a quick elevator pitch to just check your understanding on these things. If you're in a class with several of your friends, giving little elevator pitches on the main topics of the material is a nice way to study together, but in a much more engaging and active manner. Another little tip that I like to give out for STEM classes is try writing out your steps for STEM. So I know the majority of students that I work with focus mostly on just doing practice problems until they get the right answer, which is helpful sometimes, but it can be more helpful to sort of create your own set of steps for handling problems in order to make it sense and to then adapt it for other problems that you might get on the exam. So the way that you do this is you solve your problem just like you normally would, but at the beginning, you make sure to identify the goal of the problem and what type of problem it is. And then next to your solution, you're going to write out in your own words what's actually going on in that problem. And this is another way to really deeply and actively engage with the material, because that translation really sort of gives you this concrete connection between what is happening in the work and how you're actually getting those steps. So I highly recommend trying this out for any class that has sort of problems like this. Now, the last little thing that we're going to talk about when it comes to studying is you are either preparing for an exam or for a project. So it's really important to understand the exam format that you're working in and study in a way that's going to be effective for that. So practice tests are a really lovely way to do that. And you might be getting some practice exams from your instructor, so you may already have that resource, but you want to make sure you actually practice in the way that you're going to perform. So if your exam is, like closed note or being proctored in some way, make sure that you practice that way as well. Set your notes aside, set a timer for yourself so you understand how quickly you need to work through the material, and then go through the exam that way. And really develop that habit and develop the skills that you're going to be able to directly apply to the exam itself. So the most important thing to take away from studying is that you need to practice your answers. You need to practice the material. And the best way to do that is dive deep into it by talking aloud, making graphs, solving equations, and translating it. But most importantly, find a way that engages the material in some way that's meaningful for you. So I'm going to leave some time here at the end, and we can kind of go over some different ideas for ways to actively study. So if any of you have questions, please let me know and we can talk about those different things at the end. And one little quick thing that I want you all to keep in mind when it comes to practice tests is if you're writing your own practice exams, it's really easy for you to write questions that you know you can answer. So connect with a few people in your class and trade some practice exam questions around, because those other students are going to give you different things that maybe you aren't as confident about, and it can really challenge you in new ways to make sure you understand the information. And it's still possible to do online. You can create, a group message, a Discord server, anything that makes sense for you to trade some of those practice questions around. Just make sure that you're using that in a way that doesn't break any academic dishonesty rules. So that is a concern that instructors have, so keep that in mind. Just keep everything above board and really good as we go online. So, you've got your study plan, you've got everything worked out. You want to make sure that your space, like we kind of talked about, is set up for the success as well. So making sure that you have that dedicated space to get some of this studying done is going to be really helpful for you in the long run. Oh, computer froze. There we go. Okay, so you've got your schedule. You've gone to class, you have your notes, you have your space, you have your study plan, you're studying away, you're feeling really good about it. And then you realize there's some gaps in the material that you're covering. So how do we actually fill in those gaps? What resources are available to us to make sure that we still have all of the support that we need to get through the rest of the semester in as successful as a manner as possible? So really quickly, I'm going to cover some of the different resources on campus, and these include academic coaching, Vandal tutoring, SiPass, the Writing Center, CDAR, Beams, the CTC. And then as a quick note here at the start, your professor and your TAs are really great resources. So try and stay connected with those folks even when we go off campus. They're going to be the most useful resources for each class when it comes to asking questions about what might be on the exam, or, if they're taking points off on homework, why are they doing that? How can I improve on those things? But with that, let's dive into a couple of resources that can help us feel successful and really contribute to our studying. So the first, because it's what I do and I think it's awesome, is academic coaching. So I offer one-on-one appointments to students to work through academic challenges and really build success strategies. So this is just a taste of all that I talk about with students, and it's really general. But when I meet with students one-on-one, I personalize everything it is that we talk about and make sure that they feel really supported throughout everything that they're doing. You can make an appointment with me or with the other academic coach, Rachel, either by emailing acadcoaching@uidaho.edu or by searching academic coaching on Vandalstar and selecting make an appointment. And from there, you can see all of our availability and just schedule online. But if you want to email me, just let me know when you're available so I can get something on my calendar. Okay, so the next thing is tutoring. So we support a lot of 100 and 200 level courses in biology, math, chemistry, psychology, engineering, poli-sci, AVS, business stats, econ, accounting, sociology, and architecture. So when we go off campus, everything will be online, both drop-in and one-on-one appointments. So what's really nice about those one-on-one appointments is, let's say you have a really hectic schedule, but you want to make sure that you get some time with a tutor. You can request a specific time for a specific course and make sure that you're getting that support that you need. If you just Google tutoring on U of I's website, this page will pop up and you'll be able to schedule an online tutoring appointment. Now, SiPass is something that I've been helping out with all semester, and these are peer-assisted study sessions for traditionally difficult courses. So this is a list of the courses that we currently support. And basically what SiPass is you just have to come to the meeting with the materials that you need, and one of our student leaders is going to lead a study session. So they don't answer homework questions, they don't help you work on the homework. What they instead help you do is really dive deep into that material and make sure that you understand it. If you've never been to an SiPass session beforehand, I recommend checking out one of the pre-exam sessions. just because they're going to go over all of the material that will be on the exam and really help you feel confident in it. So these are offered both online and in person currently, and after break they'll be all online. You can just drop in, get as much help as you need, and head out. Our student leaders are really great. I love working with them. So I would highly recommend checking it out if your course is supported. Next is the Writing Center. So I've noticed that a lot of instructors are shifting from final exams to big projects. So if you have a giant essay or any other type of project that involves a writing component, check out the Writing Center, and they can help with all steps of your project. So they aren't there to just edit, they can help you plan the project and develop it as you go. Everything that they do is available online, and they offer both synchronous and asynchronous help. So what that means is, let's say you don't have enough time to sit down with a tutor for an hour. You can submit your paper, and then 1 to 2 days later, you'll get edits sent back to you. So if you're really busy, that's a great option. So a couple of the next resources that I'm going to talk about are more to deal with like any sort of stresses that might go beyond the classroom. So the first is the Center for Disability Access and Resources, or CDAR, and they provide all of the accommodations on campus for students that need them. So the first thing that I like to remind folks is that accommodations are really common, so there's no shame in them. If you need some help getting through a course, that's perfectly normal, and this is the office that you want to connect with. Additionally, if you're looking for a job, CDAR hires some people to take notes for students in classes, and it's a really great on-campus flexible job. Next is Better Education About Money for Students, or BEAMS, and I like to remind folks about this because I've heard from a lot of students that money is a really big concern right now. Due to the pandemic, you may have lost a job or have, some difficulty in those areas. So meeting with our BEAMS advisor, they can, really help you look at all of the different options for getting support with any money struggles. They're really nice. I like working with their office a lot. And then there's the Counseling and Testing Center, which is available to students online. It's free. The only thing that you have to pay for is if you're looking for a medical diagnosis. The screening for that, there is a small fee associated with it. But just to get regular talk therapy counseling is completely free to students. It's something that I used while I was both an undergraduate and a graduate student, and it really helped me get through the semester in a more successful way. So if you have any questions or want to schedule an appointment, just Google the CTC on UIdaho's website and their phone number will pop right up. So just to kind of sum up what's going on, I want to make sure that you all keep a couple things in mind. Right now is a really stressful time. I'm sure you're all really feeling it. So be kind to yourself. Remember that you can have the best schedule ever, but your priorities might change. So when you're building that schedule, include flexibility for that to happen, because life happens, right? You may have a family member get sick, you might get sick, you may have to go into quarantine because you were in contact with someone who is sick. Just realize that that's okay, and then keep in communication with the people in your life who can help you kind of manage those things. Things don't always go according to plan. So let's say you blocked out a ton of time to handle a project, like you blocked out 3 hours and it only took you an hour. Use that extra time to get ahead in some other class or to take a break for yourself and kind of de-stress a little bit. And if you run into the situation where you have less time available to you, make sure you've built some of that flexibility into your schedule so that you can handle it and you can shift things around a little bit and still feel really successful. And then keep in mind that right now there might be other people that need your help. So kind of make sure that you're checking in with them and then checking in with yourself to make sure you're not feeling too overwhelmed. And the final thing that I like to remind people after every presentation is to breathe, because if you're feeling overwhelmed with studying or time management or anything like that, taking a few seconds, a few deep breaths, and then diving back into it can make all the difference and can be really helpful for you in the long run. So with that, I wanted to make sure I left quite a bit of time here at the end to handle any questions that y'all might have. So you can type them into the chat. You can unmute yourself and ask me any questions, but are there any things in regards to academic success or time management or anything like that that I can help y'all out with? Because I'm an instructor, I'm really good at just waiting in silence, and it's totally fine with me. It's easier on Zoom because you can't see me making eye contact with all of you. Oh, good. Okay, what is the most common way to study? Whew. So the thing that I see that a lot of folks do is they just start rewriting their notes or resolving old problems. And that's really useful. Oh, thanks. I'm glad I gave you good tips. But when it comes to like rewriting your notes, that doesn't necessarily get you into the material in a new way. It just kind of helps you recover everything. So that's a great first way to get started, but then you kind of need to expand what you're doing. So when I mentioned like giving elevator pitches or writing out the steps to your problems, that takes what you're doing and kind of shifts it to the next level. So one of the things that you can do if you really like to rewrite your notes is to rewrite them in a different way. So one of the most common note-taking methods is like the outline method, where you have a lot of bullet points and you kind of go through that. One thing that you can try to do is change it into a concept map where you like put your main topic at the center and try to connect it with all of the different topics in class. And again, this makes you dive deeper into the material and try to find that connective tissue between everything. That's a lot kind of more challenging to do. Okay, can you go over some simple ways for the different types of learners to study, i.e. visual, audio, kinesthetic, etc.? Awesome question, very cool. So yeah, oh, and we also have how do you deal with distractions that you can't really get rid of, AKA siblings. 10 out of 10, my brother lives across the street from me. Sometimes I just send him home. So I'll tackle that one first. When it comes to siblings, communication is really key. So if your siblings are old enough to understand, like, hey, I'm in college, I've got a lot of stuff to do, sitting down with them beforehand and like kind of coming up with what your schedule is and sharing that schedule with them is really helpful. It can kind of get everybody on the same page. If you've got a lot of younger siblings, then it may be that you need to incorporate the help of your parent or their parent or any other like kind of adult figure like that. But again, treating it like a formal meeting and sitting down with folks and letting them know just how much stuff you have on your plate goes a long way. So I know when I was in school and I would go home for breaks, but I still needed to get some stuff done, my parents didn't understand that I had a lot of things to do. So I just had to like lay it all out for them so they could see like, oh no, Kelly is actually very busy. So I think some of that communication is really key. Okay, so let's see, I'm gonna pop back up here. When it comes to different ways to learn, I think playing into what it is that you enjoy doing is a nice thing. So if you're a visual learner, try and find YouTube videos of other instructors teaching that material. What's nice is right now, a lot of us instructors are putting everything online. So it's going to be a lot easier to find those videos. And sometimes just hearing the information described in a different way goes a long ways. So that kind of plays into audio and visual learning. If you're someone who's much more hands-on, sometimes just getting up while you study can help the information stick better. So if I ever needed to memorize something, like if you're taking an anatomy and physiology class and you've got a lot of different muscle groups or something to memorize, take your flashcards or your Quizlet or anything like that and walk around while you're doing it. It can kind of help build that muscle memory with the actual memory that you're trying to form. If you're interested in some more specific ones for different courses, go ahead and send me an email. and I can connect with you and come up with some different ways to help with some of that. Okay, so the best advice for retention of material during online classes is make sure you're taking notes just like it was an in-person class. So that's one thing that I see folks do is they'll rely on the fact that the lectures are recorded and just think, oh, I can go back to it at any point. I don't need to take notes. Yes, it's true, you can go back to it, but do you really want to sit through all of your lectures right before a test because you didn't take notes? Probably not. So making sure that you're treating those recorded lectures or, posted slides just like you would a normal class is really critical. It can be really hard to stay focused while you're doing that. So kind of setting up your space, setting a timer, and treating it like you're in class is one way to get through that. Let's see, I've had trouble staying awake because I have to stare at my computer so much. Do you have any tips for that? Yes. So if you're stuck inside all the time and none of your classes are in person, you're missing out on that movement between classes. So normally when we're on campus in classes, we're able to get up between classes, walk to another building, sit down, and do the thing. Right now we can't do that. So what I do when I work from home is, because I don't have my walk to work anymore, I just go at 8:40 or 7:40, walk around the block, come in, start working, and then go from there. At lunch, I get up, walk around the block, come back, take a lunch break, and I do that at the end of the day as well. And that can really give you that sort of break from everything, and make sure that you aren't getting headaches from your computer or anything like that. And the other important thing is try to find ways to disengage with your work, to take a break that don't involve technology. So if your go-to is to watch Netflix, that's awesome, but maybe try and incorporate some other things that don't involve your computer as well. So I've picked up a lot of weird hobbies over the quarantine, which I'm sure a lot of people have, but trying to make sure that those hobbies are more tangible and hands-on is a nice thing to do. Okay, what is the most common thing you tell students not to do? Don't wait until 3 days before the exam to start studying. It's a terrible life choice. So there's a myth that you only need 3 days to study. That's super not true. Some classes you can study in that amount of time and it's great and that's awesome, but a lot of classes you can't. So make sure you give yourself enough time to get the studying done that you need. The second tip that I give students is learn how to say no to things. So if you're feeling really overwhelmed and you have a ton of obligations that are coming up, it's okay to turn some things down and take some time for yourself to relax. That's really useful as well. Okay, how would you suggest staying engaged in classes that seem to drone on and on? If they're recorded lectures, pause them. Walk away for a little bit. I know that some instructors have the most monotone voices that are super hard to listen to. I have this fear that I'm the same way. So if it's getting just super boring, but it's all recorded, pause it, take a little break, come back to it. There's nothing wrong with doing that. If it's a live Zoom lecture, one way that you can kind of stay engaged is actively think of questions that you want to answer throughout the material. So you can kind of read ahead beforehand, skim the chapter, see what things sound interesting, and then listen for those things as you're sitting through the lecture. Yeah, also writing down the information helps your brain retain it. True that. The best way to stay connected to professors, go to office hours. Professors right now are required to have posted office hours that folks can drop into, even if they're fully online. If your professor does not have any listed, you can let your department know. That is a requirement that we're all supposed to follow right now, so that's really important. I sometimes come up with stupid questions to take to office hours, even if I already know the answer, just so I can connect with my instructor. The other thing is, send emails about any little question that you have. Don't wait until right before something is due. Yes, highly recommend knitting, super great. I am terrible at crafts. I wish I could show some to you, they're awful. Okay. Sometimes I have a really hard time with focusing and having motivation, especially with the more stressful classes and assignments. Do you have any tips for that? Yeah. So I kind of mentioned this throughout, but breaking down tasks into really small steps is one of the simplest ways to get motivation. One of the other things to do is to have an accountability buddy, as I call it. So find someone that you're close with, that you feel comfortable kind of sharing the struggle with, and just ask them like, hey, I really need to get this thing done. Do you also have an assignment that you need to get done? Can we kind of like sit in the same room and keep each other accountable to get it taken care of? That might have been something that you could do during study table. So shifting it to just like doing it with a friend once we go online and maybe doing it over Zoom is another way to kind of stay motivated. Again, just like all of these tips, if you have a specific question for like your specific situation, please reach out to me. I'd love to chat about it more in depth. And we can kind of go over lots of little things and really personalize it to you as well. Okay, and the last one, is reading for fun a good study break? Yeah, it's a great study break because it's not a screen and it's something that's enjoyable. And the most important thing about a break is that it should be relaxing and a way for you to actually disconnect from stuff. So a quick show of hands for engagement. How many of you actually have trouble taking a break and it actually being relaxing? Yeah. Are you normally thinking about like all of the other stuff that you need to get done? Some nods. Yeah. Does that also happen when you try to go to bed at night? Are you like stressed out about the million other things that you've got on your mind? Yeah. So our brains are really good at taking care of us, evolutionary great things, where they're like, hey, this is important and I want you to remember it so that we stay alive. And that would be super cool if we were like stuck out in the woods, but we're not. We're in a house, we're comfortable, we're safe, it's fine. However, it's hard to convince our brains of that. So one thing that you can do is before you take a break or before you go to bed at night, have a notebook and literally write out every single thing that's on your brain. And it can just be a list of really weird things. It's something that I do. Bless my partner, he has seen me do it. I know I look like a mad woman as I'm writing out like, respond to emails, thinking about my parents, what am I gonna buy people for Christmas? What are my travel plans? Like just every little dumb thing that's on my brain. But when you write it down on a piece of paper, you can tell your brain like, hey, no worries. We're not gonna forget, it's taken care of, it's put there. You can fold it in half and you can set it aside until you wake up the next day or until after your break is done. And that can really help you make sure that the rest that you're trying to have is as fulfilling and as useful as possible for yourself. So I recommend trying that out. It's a really small thing that can make a really big difference. I hope I answered all of the questions. It was a little rapid fire. But if any of you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. My favorite part of my job is meeting with folks one-on-one. It's a lot of fun. I'd be more than happy to schedule a time before Thanksgiving break or right after we get back to meet with any of you. Are there any other questions that I can answer? No? Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. It has been lovely to see all of your faces. I miss being in person with folks, but this will have to do. I will get this recording out to you. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording now.